At 8221 Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, there stands a 7-story Gothic castle that has no business existing. Norman Revival towers rise above the Sunset Strip. Turrets cast shadows across Marmont Lane. The building resembles a Loire Valley chateau transported to California, which is exactly what its creator intended. Completed in 1929, the Chateau Marmont was built from reinforced concrete and steel, earthquake-proof, fireproof. The walls were double-poured concrete, which is to say soundproof. What happened in one room could not be heard in another. This was not accidental. In the mid-1930s, Columbia Pictures co-founder Harry Cohn gave his young actors Glenn Ford and William Holden specific advice. If you must get into trouble, do it at the Marmont. The hotel's reputation for discretion was already established. The soundproof walls protected secrets. The absent lobby prevented observation. The labyrinthine corridors offered escape routes. For nearly a century, the Chateau Marmont has functioned as Hollywood's confessional, its sanctuary, and its crime scene. Behind those reinforced concrete walls, love affairs and overdoses, racial integration and discrimination, artistic creation and sexual harassment, tolerance and exploitation coexisting in soundproof rooms. This is that story. Before we step inside those soundproof rooms, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about the hidden architecture of Hollywood scandal, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation into the monuments built on contradictions. Now let's begin with the onion field where everything started. In 1926, the corner of Marmont Lane and Sunset Boulevard was an onion field. Sunset Boulevard itself was an unpaved bridle path, a dirt road connecting the separate cities of Los Angeles and Beverly Hills. The site sat on a hillside at Hollywood's far western border with the West Hollywood County District. From this elevation, views stretched across Southern California. Mount Baldy to the east. Catalina Island, visible on clear days to the west. The sprawling lights of Los Angeles below. The land was agricultural, working farmland in a neighborhood that was rapidly transforming into something else. Fred Horowitz, a prominent Los Angeles attorney, looked at this impossible site and chose it anyway. Horowitz had graduated from the University of Southern California Law School in 1916, when the school still met in City Hall. During his time there, he formed a partnership with a classmate named Mabel Walker Willebrandt. Both were ambitious, both were talented. After graduation, they opened a law practice together in downtown Los Angeles. Both became assistant United States attorneys. Willebrandt would go on to national fame. She became known as Prohibition Portia, the First Lady of Law. As Assistant Attorney General from 1921 to 1929, she prosecuted bootleggers with legendary efficiency. She developed the strategy of charging major criminals with income tax evasion when other charges failed to stick. Her work would later enable the successful prosecution of Al Capone in 1931. Horowitz took a different path. He prosecuted civil rights cases in the South. This was dangerous work in the 1910s and 1920s. He handled cases involving voting rights, discrimination, violations of constitutional protections for Black Americans. The work required him to travel to small southern towns where federal authority was resented, and civil rights prosecution was seen as northern interference. Horowitz received death threats. Multiple times he had to leave towns quickly because threats against his life became credible and immediate. Local authorities sometimes warned him. Sometimes they participated in the threats. He returned to Los Angeles and established what would become an esteemed law practice. His clients included high-profile business people and celebrities of the era. The practice was lucrative. By the mid-1920s, Horowitz had accumulated significant wealth. In 1925, Horowitz traveled to Europe. He toured France extensively, photographing architecture throughout the Loire Valley. He visited dozens of chateaux, medieval castles, Renaissance palaces, Gothic structures that had stood for centuries. One building particularly captured his imagination, the Chateau d'Amboise, a royal residence perched above the Loire River. The chateau dated to the 15th century. Gothic and Renaissance elements combined, towers and turrets, defensive architecture transformed into residential grandeur. Leonardo da Vinci had lived his final years at Amboise, invited by King Francis I. Da Vinci was buried in the chateau's chapel. Horowitz photographed Amboise from every angle. He took detailed notes. He studied the proportions, the materials, the way the building commanded its hilltop site. Horowitz returned to California with a vision. He would build a tower of luxury apartments on that onion-field hillside above Sunset Boulevard. The building would evoke the grandeur of European chateau while incorporating modern American engineering. 43 apartments. Each would be self-contained with its own kitchen. Underground parking in the basement, private balconies offering those commanding views. The construction would be earthquake-resistant, essential for California. The walls would be soundproof, essential for luxury living. He considered names. Chateau Sunset was too generic. Chateau Hollywood was too obvious. He settled on Chateau Marmont, named after the small street, barely more than a lane that would run in front of the property. The name sounded French, aristocratic, exclusive. Horowitz commissioned his brother-in-law to design the building. Arnold A. Weitzman was European-trained, an architect who understood the aesthetic Horowitz wanted. Co-architect William Douglas Lee joined the project, bringing technical expertise in reinforced concrete construction. Together they designed a 7-story L-shaped structure that would transplant French Gothic sensibilities to the Hollywood Hills. The design was ambitious. The location was difficult. The timing, though no one knew it yet, would prove catastrophic. In 1927, construction began. Construction proceeded from 1927 through 1929. Weitzman and Lee specified reinforced concrete throughout the structure. This was revolutionary for residential construction in the late 1920s. Most apartment buildings used traditional materials: wood framing, brick, plaster. Reinforced concrete was expensive. It required specialized contractors. It was typically reserved for commercial buildings, bridges, industrial structures. For an apartment building, it was excessive, but Horowitz wanted permanence. He wanted a building that would outlast him, that would stand for generations. Steel frames were embedded in the concrete to provide additional earthquake resistance. Los Angeles had experienced devastating earthquakes. The 1812 earthquake had been so powerful it changed the course of the Los Angeles River. Smaller quakes hit regularly. Engineers in the 1920s were developing new techniques for seismic resistance. The Chateau Marmont would incorporate every available innovation. The foundation was anchored deep into the hillside bedrock. The steel-reinforced concrete walls would flex slightly during tremors rather than crack. The building was designed to move with earthquakes rather than resist them rigidly. The walls served a second purpose. They were double-poured concrete. 2 layers with space between them. This construction technique made each apartment exceptionally soundproof. Privacy was engineered into the architecture. Tenants in one apartment would not hear conversations, arguments, music, or any other activity from adjacent units. This was marketed as a luxury feature. What it actually created was isolation. Each apartment became its own sealed chamber. The exterior design evoked medieval France. Norman Revival style dominated. Gothic elements provided dramatic accent. Towers rose at the corners of the L-shaped building. Turrets created a castle-like silhouette against the sky. The building would be visible from Sunset Boulevard below, a Gothic fantasy rising from the Hollywood Hills. 7 stories tall, the highest point in the immediate neighborhood. The design was meant to suggest European aristocratic heritage, transplanted to California's newest wealthy enclave. The construction workers who built this monument left no record. No names appear in construction archives. No payroll records survived. No accidents were reported in newspapers. No deaths were documented. This absence is conspicuous. Construction of a 7-story reinforced concrete structure on a difficult hillside site would have employed dozens of workers over 2 years. Concrete workers, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, laborers. Someone was injured. Statistics from the era suggest construction work was dangerous. Yet no record exists of injuries at the Chateau Marmont construction site. Horowitz photographed the construction process obsessively. Dozens of photographs survive showing the building at various stages, the foundation being poured, walls rising floor by floor. The steel framework visible before concrete encased it. The Gothic exterior taking shape, balconies being installed, the roof structure, every phase. Documented. The photographs show the building. They never show the workers. Not one photograph includes the men who mixed concrete, who operated equipment, who carried materials, who built the actual structure. The workers who created the soundproof walls vanished from history as completely as if they had never existed. The documentation gap reveals what mattered to Fred Horowitz. The monument, not the makers. On February 1st, 1929, the Chateau Marmont apartments celebrated their grand opening. Over 300 people attended the inaugural reception. Local press covered the event extensively. The Los Angeles Times described the building as Los Angeles' newest, finest, and most exclusive apartment house. Other newspapers echoed the praise. Superbly situated, one article noted. Close enough to active businesses to be accessible, far enough away to ensure quiet and privacy. The Gothic exterior impressed visitors. The earthquake-proof, fireproof, soundproof construction was marketed heavily. Each apartment featured its own kitchen, making the units ideal for long-term residents. The private balconies offered views that justified the premium rents. The building represented European sophistication meeting California modernity. The reinforced concrete stood solid on the hillside. The soundproof walls functioned exactly as designed. The earthquake-proof construction would be tested sooner than anyone expected. By fall 1929, nearly all 43 apartments were rented. Wealthy tenants occupied the soundproof chambers. Horowitz's gamble on the impossible site appeared vindicated. 300 guests had toured the building during opening reception. Newspapers praised the architectural achievement. The European-inspired design seemed perfectly suited to Hollywood's aspirational culture. Everything worked. 8 months later, everything collapsed. October 29th, 1929. Black Thursday. The stock market crashed at opening bell. By the end of trading, panic had set in. Within days, the crash triggered a financial catastrophe that would become the Great Depression. Within weeks, the Chateau Marmont's wealthy tenants began breaking their leases. The high rents that had seemed reasonable in the boom economy became impossible in the crash. New rental applications dropped to zero. Wealthy people were no longer looking for luxury apartments. Many were struggling to maintain their primary residences. Some were losing everything. The building that Fred Horowitz had engineered to withstand earthquakes could not withstand economic catastrophe. The reinforced concrete walls stood solid. The Gothic towers remained impressive. The views were unchanged. But empty apartments generated no income. Horowitz had invested heavily in construction. The reinforced concrete had been expensive. The earthquake-proof engineering had required specialized contractors. The Gothic exterior details had added cost. The project had been financed based on projections of sustained high occupancy at premium rents. Those projections evaporated overnight. Horowitz fought to maintain the building. For 2 years, he reduced rents. He offered incentives for long-term leases. Nothing worked. The depression deepened. The taste for luxury housing disappeared. Wealthy tenants could not be found at any price. In October 1931, Horowitz accepted reality. He sold the building to Albert E. Smith for $750,000 in cash, the equivalent of $15.5 million in today's currency. A Los Angeles newspaper covering the sale facetiously asked, "Did anyone say depression?" The price seemed astronomical given the economic collapse, yet Horowitz had paid even more to build it. After deducting construction costs and 2 years of losses, Horowitz and his investment partners still made approximately $300,000 profit. The timing was disastrous. The result was accidental fortune. Albert E. Smith was not interested in apartments. Smith was one of the founding fathers of Hollywood. In 1897, he and J. Stewart Blackton had co-founded Vitagraph Studios. Vitagraph became one of the most prolific early American film production companies. Smith and Blackton pioneered many filmmaking techniques. They filmed newsreels of the Spanish-American War in 1898, some of the earliest motion picture propaganda. They produced hundreds of short films annually by the early 1900s. By 1907, Vitagraph was the most prolific film production company in America. Smith had dozens of firsts to his name. He was one of the grandfathers of Hollywood. In 1925, Smith and Blackton sold Vitagraph Studios to Warner Brothers. The sale made Smith wealthy. He was 56 years old. He had helped create an industry. He decided to invest in real estate. He had already successfully converted the Bryn-Carlton apartment building in Hollywood into a thriving hotel. Smith understood the hotel business. He understood Hollywood. He looked at the Chateau Marmont and saw opportunity. The 1932 Los Angeles Summer Olympics would bring thousands of tourists to the city. Hollywood was attracting people from across America and around the world. Actors, writers, directors, producers, technicians, all hoping for film work. These people needed temporary housing. Hotels generated more revenue than apartment buildings. Apartments required long-term leases. Hotels could charge nightly. The Chateau Marmont's apartments were already designed like hotel suites, each with its own kitchen and living room. Smith would convert the operation from residential to hospitality. The building would become a hotel, not an apartment complex. Smith and his wife, Lucille, immediately began preparing for the conversion. Lucille had been a Vitagraph actress, performing under the stage name Jean Page. She had good taste. She understood aesthetics. Together, they recognized they needed to furnish 63 rooms with quality pieces. The Depression provided an opportunity as tragic as it was practical. Wealthy families across Los Angeles were closing their mansions. The economic collapse had destroyed fortunes. Estates were being liquidated. Families who had imported furniture from Europe, who had collected for generations, were now desperate for cash. Estate sales and auctions offered centuries-old furniture for pennies on the dollar. Albert and Lucille Smith began attending these sales systematically. They went to Adams Boulevard, where some of Los Angeles's wealthiest families had built mansions during the boom. They went to Los Feliz Boulevard, to Glendale, to Pasadena. Everywhere, Depression-era estate sales offered treasures at disaster prices. They purchased rare and imported antiques by the carload. French armoires and tables from 18th century workshops, English furniture by master craftsmen, Italian pieces ornately carved, Oriental artifacts, screens, and cabinets. The furniture came from different estates, different eras, different aesthetic traditions. Nothing matched. A French Rococo chair might sit beside an English Tudor table. Italian Renaissance pieces mixed with Art Nouveau lamps. The result was eclectic chaos. No cohesive design philosophy, no consistent style. Just layer upon layer of luxury, each piece acquired cheap because someone's fortune had collapsed. This mismatched collection created what would become known as the Marmont look. Visitors would describe it as bohemian elegance, shabby chic before the term existed. The effect was simultaneously grand and intimate, every room different. Every space filled with history, though not the building's own history, the history of Los Angeles families who had lost everything. The furniture told stories the hotel would never acknowledge. Smith converted the 43 apartments into hotel suites. The kitchens remained. The living rooms stayed intact. He added basic room service. He hired silent film actress Ann Little to manage the property. Little had worked in Hollywood during the silent era. She understood the film community. She knew how to maintain discretion. She helped Smith prepare the hotel for opening. In 1932, ahead of the Summer Olympics, the Chateau Marmont Hotel opened to guests. Tourists came for the Olympics. Many stayed at the chateau. The hotel concept worked. The conversion was successful. By the mid-1930s, the Chateau Marmont had established itself as something specific, a place where discretion was guaranteed and enforced. The building's original design features became advantages for this purpose. The absent lobby meant no public gathering space where guests might be observed by other guests or by press. People entered through a small reception area that one early resident compared to the counter in a village corner shop. No grand staircase, no place to see and be seen. Just a desk and an elevator. The labyrinthine corridors offered privacy and multiple escape routes. The building's L-shaped design and 7 stories created a maze. One resident complained that the place had more doors than the funhouse at Ocean Park Pier. The comparison captured something essential about the architecture: multiple exits, multiple staircases, ways to move through the building without being observed. The layout was confusing by design or by accident, but the confusion served a purpose. The soundproof walls meant no one heard what happened in adjacent rooms. Conversations remained private. Arguments went unheard. Whatever activities guests engaged in occurred in acoustic isolation. The double-poured concrete that made the building earthquake-proof also made it scandal-proof, or so it seemed. In 1933, Jean Harlow moved into the hotel. She was 22 years old, already a major star, the original blonde bombshell. She arrived with her third husband, MGM cinematographer Harold Rawson. The marriage was a studio arrangement. Louis B. Mayer had orchestrated it to manage Harlow's image and provide cover for her affair with Clark Gable. Essentially, a sham marriage. The couple lived in separate rooms at the Chateau Marmont. They maintained the appearance of marriage while living separate lives. The arrangement lasted 3 months. During those 3 months, Clark Gable frequently visited Harlow's room. The staff saw him. They said nothing. The soundproof walls contained whatever happened. The absent lobby meant Gable could arrive and leave without being observed by other guests or press. Columbia Pictures co-founder and CEO Harry Cohn watched how the hotel functioned. Cohn understood what the Chateau Marmont offered to the film industry. Sometime in the mid-1930s, he gave specific advice to his young contract players, Glenn Ford and William Holden. Both were rising stars. Both were young men prone to the behavior young men engage in. Cohn told them directly, if you must get into trouble, do it at the Marmont. The advice became the hotel's unofficial motto. It spread through Hollywood. Everyone understood what Cohn meant. The soundproof walls protected more than sleep. They protected affairs, indiscretions, behavior that would destroy careers if observed at more public establishments. A competing motto emerged, though no one remembers who said it first. If you want to be seen, go to the Beverly Hills Hotel. If you don't want to be seen, go to Chateau Marmont. The distinction was clear. The Beverly Hills Hotel was for publicity. The Chateau Marmont was for privacy. Stars who wanted photographers went to Beverly Hills. Stars who wanted to avoid photographers went to the chateau. The hotel had accidentally created discretion as a marketable product. Albert Smith had simply converted apartments to hotel rooms, hired film people as staff, and opened for business. But the architecture itself, the soundproof walls, the absent lobby, the maze of corridors, enabled a culture of protected secrecy. Celebrities could behave like civilians without fear of exposure. The press could not observe them. Studio bosses could not monitor them. Spouses could not discover them. The Chateau Marmont sold privacy in a city built on publicity. The business model was sound. The cultural impact would prove complicated. In 1942, someone who understood discretion differently bought the hotel. Erwin Brettauer was born into a German banking dynasty. His family had built their fortune over generations. His mother was Jewish. In the 1930s, as the Nazi Party consolidated power in Germany, Brettauer watched his country transform. His Jewish heritage made him a target. His banking fortune made him valuable to the regime. He refused to cooperate. By 1941, Brettauer had fled Germany with his fortune intact. He arrived in New York City with millions in assets and a commitment to resist fascism. During World War II, Brettauer used his banking fortune to fund resistance efforts throughout Western Europe. He financed underground movements. He helped people escape occupied territories. He provided money for sabotage operations, for information networks, for the hidden war against Nazi occupation. His wealth, extracted from Germany, funded the fight against the regime that had driven him into exile. In 1942, while still engaged in this work, Brettauer purchased the Chateau Marmont Hotel from Albert Smith. Brettauer brought European sensibilities to Hollywood. He had witnessed the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany. He had watched intolerance become policy, then law, then genocide. He understood what happened when discrimination was normalized. He implemented a policy at the Chateau Marmont that was revolutionary for 1940s Hollywood. He welcomed everyone. Which is to say, explicitly, he welcomed black guests. The color line that kept black entertainers out of first-class hotels in Beverly Hills and West Hollywood did not exist at Brettauer's Chateau. The hotel became Hollywood's first racially integrated hotel. Duke Ellington was the first black guest. This was not accidental. Brettauer specifically invited him. Ellington was already one of the most famous musicians in America. His orchestra had been performing and recording for over a decade. But in 1940s Los Angeles, fame did not override the color line. Black entertainers could perform for white audiences. They could not stay at white hotels. Ellington accepted Brettauer's invitation. He stayed at the chateau repeatedly. He found he could work there. One visit, he spent days walking the hotel's corridors, composing in his head. The music that emerged from those walks became the album Swinging Suites by Edward E. and Edward G. He appropriately named it after his time at the Chateau. After Ellington broke the color line, other black jazz musicians followed. Dizzy Gillespie stayed at the Chateau. Errol Garner, Quincy Jones, Sarah Vaughan, Nina Simone, each found at the Chateau what they could not find at other Hollywood hotels: accommodation without humiliation. They could enter through the front door. They could use the facilities. They could live as guests, not as exceptions to be managed. Miles Davis stayed at the Chateau multiple times. In the spring of 1963, he was in Los Angeles recording the album 7 Steps to Heaven at Columbia Studios. He brought his wife, Frances Taylor. Frances was a dancer. She had appeared on the cover of Miles's 1961 album, Someday My Prince Will Come. She hoped to start a film career. An extended stay in Hollywood offered opportunity. The couple made the Chateau their base. Miles socialized at the hotel. One afternoon, he went pheasant hunting in the nearby canyons with actor Rip Torn. Frances met casting directors. She pursued auditions. The Chateau functioned as home base for their Hollywood ambitions. The hotel that Fred Horowitz had built for wealthy white tenants had become sanctuary for black artists who were prohibited from staying elsewhere in the neighborhood. Brettauer made physical improvements to the property. He built a swimming pool. This was the hotel's first real gathering space. The first area where guests might encounter each other outside their soundproof rooms. A watering hole, a place for conversation and connection. The pool became socially significant beyond its recreational function. It became a sanctuary within a sanctuary, particularly for closeted gay Hollywood. The hotel's discretion policies extended to sexual orientation. The staff asked no questions. The soundproof rooms protected privacy. The pool offered a place where gay men and women could socialize with less fear of exposure. Anthony Perkins arrived in Hollywood in 1955 to star in Friendly Persuasion. He was a New York prep school kid turned stage actor, following his father Osgood Perkins into the profession. Tony took a room at the Chateau. He quickly developed a reputation as eccentric. He hitchhiked to the studio despite being a rising star. He kept a pet bird that he wore on his shoulder. He walked Sunset Boulevard in unusual outfits. At the Chateau pool, he met Tab Hunter. Hunter was also a young actor. Closeted like Perkins, they began an affair that lasted 2 years. The pool was where they met. The soundproof rooms were where they conducted the relationship. The staff never mentioned it. The discretion extended to protecting lives, not just reputations. Brettauer attracted other Central European exiles beyond jazz musicians. People fleeing fascism found refuge at the Chateau. 2 Habsburg archdukes stayed there. Displaced royalty from a collapsed empire finding accommodation in Hollywood. The hotel developed what one historian would later call a Weimar-esque tolerance, a small d democratic openness. Everyone was welcome regardless of race, religion, sexuality, or political refugee status. The discretion that Albert Smith had created to protect affairs was now protecting something more important: people's safety and dignity. The architecture remained unchanged. The purpose evolved. During World War II, the Chateau Marmont served as an air raid shelter for Sunset Strip residents. Los Angeles feared Japanese bombing raids. Air raid drills were conducted regularly. The Chateau's reinforced concrete construction made it one of the strongest structures in the neighborhood. During alerts, neighbors took shelter there. Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman took shelter at the Chateau. Humphrey Bogart and Mayo Methot. Peter Lorre, Lena Horne. These were residents from nearby homes and apartments, seeking protection in the Gothic castle that had been built to withstand earthquakes. Humphrey Bogart served as one of the neighborhood's air raid wardens. He took the duty seriously, patrolling the Strip during blackouts, making sure lights were extinguished, directing people to shelter. The hotel that had been built for European aristocratic aesthetics became a literal fortress for a Hollywood neighborhood at war. Not everyone appreciated Brettauer's integration policies. Howard Hughes stayed at the hotel repeatedly during the 1940s and 50s. Hughes was already legendary, as aviator, as engineer, as film producer, as eccentric billionaire. He used the Chateau for his affairs and his business meetings. But according to multiple accounts, Hughes deliberately avoided direct contact with the hotel's black employees. He was reportedly uncomfortable with Brettauer's integration. When Hughes needed something, he communicated through white staff members even when black employees were closer or more readily available. The contradiction was typical for the era and for Hughes specifically. The hotel that protected black jazz legends also hosted white producers who refused to acknowledge black staff members. In 1956, Montgomery Clift nearly died in a car crash at a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house. His face was shattered. His jaw was broken in multiple places. Several teeth were knocked out. His nose was crushed. He needed extensive reconstructive surgery. Elizabeth Taylor, his close friend, arranged for him to recover at the Chateau Marmont. She wanted him to have privacy during his recuperation and during the reconstruction of his famous face. Clift took room 36. He spent weeks there, healing from disfiguring wounds and enduring painful surgeries to restore his appearance. The scars would remain. His career would never fully recover. During his stay, Clift was frequently medicated, often depressed, sometimes in intense pain. He was known to appear on his balcony completely nude, screaming obscenities into the void at passing cars and pedestrians. The soundproof walls meant other guests did not hear him. The hotel's layout meant other guests did not see him. The staff maintained discretion. Clift's breakdown remained private. The architectural features that Fred Horowitz had engineered for luxury living now protected a man whose life was falling apart. Film director Nicholas Ray lived at the chateau in one of the bungalows during the mid-1950s. Ray was directing Rebel Without a Cause, the film that would make James Dean an icon. Ray held the script read through in his chateau bungalow. The cast gathered there. James Dean and Natalie Wood met for the first time in that room. They read through the script together. According to one account, Dean had arrived by hopping through the window rather than using the door, making an entrance even at a casual script reading. The hotel functioned as workspace, residence, and social club for creative people who valued privacy over glamour. The bohemian atmosphere that Brettauer encouraged attracted artists. Brettauer continued adding physical improvements. In 1952 and again in 1956, he commissioned architect Craig Ellwood to design 2 additional bungalows for the property. Ellwood was a rising star in modernist architecture. He had recently completed several of his famous case study houses, experimental modernist homes that would influence residential architecture for decades. His bungalows for the chateau were clean modernist structures, glass and steel and simple lines. They contrasted dramatically with the Gothic main building. The mix of architectural styles, French Gothic castles, Spanish cottages from the 1930s, modernist Ellwood bungalows from the 50s, matched the eclectic furniture. Nothing at the Chateau Marmont had cohesive design. Everything worked anyway. The chaos was part of the charm. In 1963, after 21 years of ownership, Erwin Brettauer sold the Chateau Marmont to property developer William Weiss. What Brettauer had built through tolerance would decay through neglect over the next 12 years. The hotel passed through multiple corporate ownership groups between 1963 and 1975. William Weiss was the first. Others followed. None demonstrated Brettauer's commitment to the property. The building aged, maintenance suffered, paint peeled. Carpets wore thin. The plumbing system installed in the 1920s began failing regularly. Leaks were patched but not properly repaired. The elevators, also original to the building, failed with increasing frequency. Guests sometimes found themselves stuck between floors. The Gothic exterior that had seemed romantic and distinguished in 1929 began to look merely shabby in the 1960s and 70s. The building acquired a reputation for decay. News articles from the period described the hotel in terms that were not flattering. An elderly castle, one article called it. Another described it as dowdy. A third used the term rundown. A 1975 article called it shabby genteel, capturing the contradiction between its architectural pretensions and its actual condition. Multiple owners attempted to sell the property. The hotel sat on the market for 2 years. Potential buyers saw only a deteriorating structure with outdated systems, difficult parking, and uncertain profitability. But the decay did not stop celebrities from using the hotel. In some ways, the deterioration enhanced the appeal for certain guests. The hotel became even more removed from mainstream Hollywood glamour. It attracted people who wanted something different from the polished luxury of Beverly Hills hotels. In the late 1960s, Jim Morrison of The Doors stayed at the Chateau repeatedly. One night, intoxicated or high or both, Morrison attempted to swing via a drainpipe from the hotel roof into the window of his room. He fell. The fall was significant enough that Morrison later told friends it had used the 8th of his 9 lives. He was not joking. Morrison believed in numerology and fate. The near-death experience at the Chateau was cataloged along with other close calls. In July 1971, Morrison used what he considered his 9th life. He died in Paris at age 27, likely from a heart attack brought on by heroin use. The Chateau Marmont became part of his mythology, one of the places where his self-destructive behavior played out. In 1968, Led Zeppelin stayed at the hotel during their first American tour. They were young, newly famous, in a foreign country, with money and acclaim and no supervision. They partied ferociously. The band and their entourage were so loud, so chaotic, that management moved them from the main building to one of the bungalows to keep the peace with other guests. Even in the bungalow, the behavior continued. According to multiple accounts, the band transported naked female guests between rooms using a misappropriated food delivery cart. They pushed the cart through the hotel grounds while women hid under tablecloths or towels. The soundproof walls and the absent lobby made such behavior possible without immediate consequences. The staff's discretion made it sustainable. The hotel that Erwin Brettauer had opened to everyone was now protecting behavior that ranged from creative eccentricity to exploitation. Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski took up residence at the Chateau in the late 1960s. They were young, beautiful, successful. Polanski was directing. Tate was acting. They used their Chateau suite as a social hub. They regularly hosted celebrity guests from the film world. Jack Nicholson came by frequently, Mia Farrow, Warren Beatty. The gatherings were glamorous, but they occurred behind closed doors. The Chateau remained Hollywood's place for people who preferred not to be seen. Even as the building decayed, even as the owners neglected maintenance, the fundamental appeal remained: privacy, discretion, and soundproof walls. By the early 1970s, the building desperately needed comprehensive repairs. Every system was failing. The electrical wiring installed in the 1920s could not handle modern loads. Circuit breakers tripped regularly. The plumbing required constant attention. The roof leaked during rare Los Angeles rains. The Gothic exterior needed repointing. The mortar between stones was crumbling. The owners made cosmetic repairs but avoided the expensive systematic renovation the building required. They attempted to sell the property multiple times. The hotel sat on the market for 2 years without serious offers. Potential buyers looked at the repair costs and walked away. Then in June 1975, Raymond Sarlot and Carl Cantargian purchased the property for $1.1 million. Raymond Sarlot was a Southern California builder and developer. He looked at the Chateau Marmont and saw a deteriorating structure on valuable land. His plan was straightforward: demolish the Gothic castle and build something more profitable. Modern apartments or condominiums. Something that would generate better returns than a shabby hotel. Sarlot's personal life intervened with his demolition plans. His marriage fell apart. His divorce forced him to find temporary housing while the proceedings finalized. He moved into the Chateau Marmont while preparing demolition plans. Living in the hotel changed his mind. Sarlot discovered he loved the place. The leisurely, almost rural atmosphere despite being on Sunset Boulevard, the eccentric mix of architectural styles, the bohemian clientele, the history embedded in every room. The building's decay was obvious, but beneath the decay was something worth preserving. Sarlot abandoned his demolition plans. Instead, he and his partner Cantargian decided on comprehensive restoration. The renovation lasted from 1975 through 1977. It was painstaking work. Sarlot and Cantargian wanted to preserve the Marmont look, the eclectic furniture, the maze-like layout, the bohemian atmosphere, while modernizing the building's systems. They rewired the entire structure. They replaced the plumbing. They repaired the roof. They renovated bathrooms and kitchens. They refinished floors. They repainted walls. but they kept the mismatched furniture that Albert Smith had acquired at Depression-era estate sales. They maintained the labyrinthine corridors. The soundproof walls remained untouched. Following Erwin Brettauer's precedent, Sarlat and Kantarjian hired Hollywood set designers to oversee the aesthetic restoration. These were people who understood how to create atmosphere, how to make spaces feel authentic even when they were constructed. The goal was not historical accuracy. The hotel had never had a consistent style to restore. The goal was to preserve and enhance the eccentric charm that made the chateau unique. The renovation succeeded in this aim. In 1976, during the renovation process, the hotel was designated a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument. The designation recognized both architectural and cultural significance, the Gothic revival structure modeled after French chateaux. The earthquake-proof reinforced concrete construction, pioneering for its era. The role in Hollywood history as sanctuary for artists and celebrities. The designation provided some protection against future demolition and established the Chateau Marmont as officially important to Los Angeles history. In May 1977, the Los Angeles Times ran an article titled _0. The hotel reopened to positive reviews. Sarlat and Kantarjian had successfully renovated the building while preserving its character. They maintained the policies of discretion and tolerance that had defined the hotel for decades. The chateau's reputation as a sanctuary was preserved even as the physical building was restored. In 1982, writer Quentin Crisp visited Los Angeles and stayed at the Chateau Marmont. He wrote about the experience approvingly in the New York Times. Crisp described the hotel's leisurely, almost rural feel. He wrote that when you arrive at the reception desk, it seems like the counter in a village corner shop. You expect to see a window containing glass jars full of sweets and dead wasps. The observation captured the chateau's eccentric, slightly decayed charm even after renovation. The hotel looked restored but felt unchanged. The atmosphere remained bohemian, welcoming, slightly surreal. Sarlat and Kantarjian added more bungalows to the property during their ownership. The demand for the private bungalows exceeded the demand for rooms in the main building. Celebrities particularly valued the bungalows for their privacy. One of the bungalows Sarlat added was about to gain tragic notoriety that would transform the hotel's reputation from sanctuary to scandal. On February 28, 1982, John Belushi checked into Bungalow 3. He was 33 years old, one of the original Saturday Night Live cast members, star of National Lampoon's Animal House, the highest-grossing comedy film of 1978, star of the Blues Brothers in 1980. One of the most famous comedians in America. He had come to Los Angeles to work on a script called Noble Rot, a romantic comedy about the early California wine industry. Paramount Pictures was interested. Belushi hoped it would revive his film career. Recent movies had not performed well. Meetings with Paramount executives were going poorly. The studio was unimpressed with Belushi's script work. People who met with him during this period described him as difficult, distracted, unreliable. Belushi's personal condition had deteriorated. After a period of sobriety in 1980, he had relapsed hard. By February 1982, his drug use was out of control. Author Sean Levy would later describe Belushi during this final week as a time bomb, a waste site, a mess. Sweaty, flabby, edgy, pale, disheveled, worn to a stump at 33. Everyone who saw him knew he was in trouble. No one stopped what was happening. During his final week, Belushi was accompanied by Cathy Smith. Smith was Canadian, 43 years old. She had been a backup singer for the band in the 1970s. She had dated Gordon Lightfoot. Their volatile relationship reportedly inspired Lightfoot's hit song, Quote One by 1982. Smith was primarily a drug dealer and user. She had met Belushi on the set of Saturday Night Live. She knew how to procure drugs. She knew how to administer injections. Belushi was needle-phobic but liked the high that intravenous drugs provided. Smith would inject him. She had been with him for the last 5 days of his life. Bungalow 3 became a stop on the circuit after the clubs on Sunset Strip closed at 2 in the morning. People came by, drugs were consumed, the soundproof walls contained whatever happened. On March 4, 1982, Nelson Lyon spent time with Belushi and Smith. Lyon was a writer for Saturday Night Live. He had known Belushi for years. Later, testifying before a grand jury, Lyon described what happened that day. Smith administered cocaine injections to both Lyon and Belushi. Lyon counted 5 separate injections over the course of the day. The drug use was continuous and escalating. That evening, the three of them went to On the Rocks, the exclusive club above the Roxy on Sunset Strip. The club was for industry insiders, a place where celebrities could drink and socialize without being observed by fans or press. They stayed for a while. They also visited the Rainbow Bar and Grill next door. At the Rainbow, Belushi complained he felt sick to his stomach from greasy food he had eaten earlier. The restaurant manager gave him a bowl of lentil soup to settle his stomach. Belushi consumed the soup, then ingested more cocaine. Smith took him back to Bungalow 3. Later that night, Robin Williams stopped by the Bungalow. Williams had just performed an unscheduled set at the Comedy Store further down Sunset Boulevard. Someone had told him Belushi was at the chateau. Williams and Belushi were friends from the comedy world. Williams found Belushi and Smith both in an inebriated state. The scene disturbed him. The atmosphere felt wrong. Williams did a small amount of cocaine, accounts vary on exactly what happened, and left within 15 or 20 minutes. He later told investigators he found the scene unsettling and did not want to be there. Robert De Niro also stopped by the Bungalow that night. De Niro was staying in his own suite at the Chateau Marmont. He had met Belushi earlier in the evening at On the Rocks. De Niro visited the Bungalow sometime after 3 in the morning. He found the atmosphere troubling. Belushi seemed very intoxicated. Smith was administering more drugs. De Niro left quickly. Multiple sources later confirmed that both Williams and De Niro had been at the Bungalow that night. Both had left disturbed by what they saw. Neither had called for help or attempted to intervene. The next morning, it would be too late. Smith and Belushi continued through the night. They injected speedballs, cocaine mixed with heroin. The combination produces an intense high followed by a crash. The cocaine stimulates the heart and nervous system. The heroin depresses them. The drugs work against each other in the body, creating strain on the cardiovascular system. For hours, Smith injected Belushi repeatedly. Sometime in the early morning, exhaustion overcame them both. Around 9:30 on the morning of March 5th, Cathy Smith woke up. She looked at Belushi sleeping on the bed. His breathing sounded wrong, labored, irregular. She shook him awake. She asked if he was okay. Belushi opened his eyes. He said 4 words, "Just don't leave me alone." Smith promised she would not. Then, a little past 10 in the morning, she left. She had errands to run. She took Belushi's rented red Mercedes and drove away from the Chateau Marmont. Belushi was alone in Bungalow 3. Around noon, Bill Wallace arrived at the Bungalow. Wallace was Belushi's fitness trainer and part-time bodyguard. He had been hired to help Belushi get in shape, to provide structure and accountability. That morning, Wallace was bringing Belushi a typewriter and a tape recorder for script work. Wallace had a key to the Bungalow. He let himself in. He called out for Belushi. No response. He walked into the bedroom. John Belushi was lying on the bed in a fetal position. A pillow covered his head. Wallace removed the pillow. Belushi's tongue was sticking out of his mouth. One side of his body was deeply discolored where blood had pooled after his heart stopped. Then the body was cold. Wallace attempted CPR. He knew immediately it was futile. Belushi had been dead for hours. Wallace called for help. EMTs arrived within minutes. They confirmed what Wallace already knew. John Belushi was pronounced dead at the scene at approximately 12:15 in the afternoon. The official Los Angeles County Coroner's report stated that John Belushi died from acute cocaine and heroin intoxication. The cocaine level in his system was 0.407 milligrams, an extremely dangerous, deadly dose even for someone with tolerance. Fresh puncture wounds covered his arms. His liver and spleen were congested from chronic drug use. His brain was swollen. The autopsy confirmed what everyone would soon learn. Belushi had overdosed on a speedball, the same combination that would later kill other comedians and actors, including Chris Farley and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Cathy Smith returned to the Chateau Marmont a few hours after Belushi's body was discovered. She was driving the wrong way into the one-way exit of the hotel in Belushi's rented red Mercedes. At that exact moment, 100 feet away, John Belushi lay naked and dead in Bungalow 3, while police and investigators processed the scene. Officers saw Smith driving the wrong way. They stopped her. They brought her in for questioning. She claimed she had been with Belushi earlier but had left to run errands. Police questioned her for several hours, then released her. No charges were filed. The official initial statement said Belushi had died of natural causes. The media did not believe it. Neither did anyone who knew Belushi. In May 1982, 2 months after the death, Cathy Smith gave an interview to the National Enquirer. The tabloid paid her for the story. In the interview, Smith confessed. She admitted she had been with Belushi on the night of March 4th into the morning of March 5th. She admitted she had injected him with drugs repeatedly. She admitted she had given him the final speedball injection that killed him. Her words were unambiguous. "I killed John Belushi." "I didn't mean to, but I am responsible." The confession made national news. The Los Angeles Police Department, facing public pressure, reopened the investigation. Smith was in Canada. She was extradited. She was charged with second-degree murder. The legal proceedings took years. Eventually, a plea bargain was reached. The murder charge was reduced to involuntary manslaughter plus 3 drug offenses. Cathy Smith pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 15 months at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. She served the full sentence. After her release, she returned to Canada. She kept a low profile. She avoided the press. She lived quietly for nearly 40 years. She died in August 2020 at age 73. The obituaries called her the woman who killed John Belushi. It was the only thing most people remembered about her. John Belushi's death fundamentally transformed the Chateau Marmont's reputation. Before March 1982, the hotel was a curiosity, a bohemian Gothic castle that few people outside Hollywood could locate on a map, a place with a reputation for discretion and tolerance. After Belushi's death, the hotel became infamous, a shady hotel where stars got up to no good. The comedian's overdose became the most famous thing about the establishment. The death became part of Hollywood lore. Dark-humored guests like Rick James and Jean-Michel Basquiat specifically requested to stay in Bungalow 3, the Death Bungalow. Hollywood ghoul tours began stopping outside the Chateau Marmont to tell the story of Belushi's final hours. The hotel that had protected affairs and provided sanctuary was now associated primarily with tragedy and scandal. The discretion that had made the Chateau Marmont special for 50 years had not prevented death. The soundproof walls had contained the sounds of Belushi dying, but had not summoned help. The staff's policy of not asking questions meant no one checked on guests who might be in distress. The architecture designed for privacy had enabled fatal isolation. The contradictions at the heart of the hotel's identity became impossible to ignore. Discretion protected both artists and addicts. Soundproof walls sheltered both love affairs and overdoses. The hotel could not choose who benefited from its protections. In 1990, 8 years after Belushi's death, a new owner purchased the Chateau Marmont with plans to transform its reputation once again. André Balazs was 33 years old when he bought the Chateau Marmont for just over $12 million. He was the son of André Alexander Balazs, a research professor at Harvard Medical School who had founded the Retina Foundation. André had grown up in Boston in an academic environment. He graduated from Cornell University. He had a vision for hotels as experiential destinations, properties with personality and history, where guests would pay premium prices not just for accommodation, but for atmosphere and cultural cachet. The Chateau Marmont fit his vision perfectly. It had history. It had notoriety. It needed comprehensive renovation. Balazs saw opportunity. One of Balazs' first acts as owner was to take the elevator upstairs and knock on a specific door. The door was opened by Helmut Newton. Newton was 70 years old, one of the world's most famous fashion photographers, known for stark, provocative black and white photographs of women. His work appeared in Vogue, Elle, Playboy. His _2_ series had made him legendary. Newton had been living at the Chateau Marmont with his wife June for decades. They spent every winter in Los Angeles, living at the chateau. then returned to Monte Carlo for the rest of the year. This pattern had continued for 25 years. Newton was a 30-year resident, the longest-term guest in hotel history. Balazs introduced himself as the new owner. Newton gave him specific advice. "André, this place is really special," Newton said, "so whatever you do, don't fuck it up." Newton meant it sincerely. He loved the hotel. He had photographed it extensively over the years. Nudes in the rooms, artists working in the bungalows. The eclectic furniture and chaotic charm documented in his distinctive style. As Newton finished giving this advice, he leaned back on the sofa where he was sitting. The fabric tore audibly. The moment was simultaneously symbolic and prophetic. The hotel's decay was evident even in Newton's room. The renovation Balazs planned would be extensive. Balazs developed a specific philosophy for the renovation. He later explained it to journalists and historians. His goal was to create the illusion that the hotel had been untouched, that it still looked exactly as it had during Hollywood's golden age. But this was fiction. The hotel had never looked like a golden age establishment. It had been shabby genteel even in the 1930s. Historian Sean Levy would later describe Balazs' approach. If this had been a glamorous golden age of Hollywood place, what would it have looked like? Balazs was creating a fantasy. In essence, Levy wrote, it was an act of stagecraft to make it look like something it had never been. Balazs was not restoring the hotel. He was inventing the hotel's history while preserving enough authentic elements to make the invention credible. The renovation was comprehensive but aesthetically subtle. The entire facility was recarpeted with materials that looked vintage but were new. The walls were repainted in colors that evoked previous eras. Public spaces were upgraded with better lighting, better furniture, better finishes. Most significantly, Balazs added a lobby. For 61 years, the hotel had operated without a traditional lobby. The absence had been part of its mystique, part of how it maintained discretion. Balazs created gathering space, a proper lobby with comfortable seating, a bar area, a place where guests could see and be seen if they wanted. The addition fundamentally changed the hotel's character. Balazs also installed higher fences around the property. He added privacy coverings and plantings to discourage the public from looking into the grounds from Sunset Boulevard below. The hotel had become too famous after Belushi's death. Tourists and gawkers would stop to take photographs. Balazs wanted to restore privacy while also making the hotel more publicly visible as a brand. The contradiction was intentional. The hotel would be famous for being private. The renovation took months. During this time, Balazs let it be known that the hotel would reopen with a new emphasis on cool. He wanted to attract a younger generation of Hollywood stars. The chateau had become associated with older bohemians and tragic has-beens. Balazs wanted Johnny Depp, not aging rockers. He wanted the hip 1990s crowd, not the damaged 1970s crowd. The strategy worked. When the hotel reopened, a new generation discovered it. The chateau became cool again. Balazs developed the hotel's restaurant scene. The terrace restaurant served market-fresh California cuisine. Bar Marmont opened and became a scene unto itself, a place where industry people met for drinks and deals. In July 2018, Balazs opened Chateau Hanare, a Japanese restaurant in a former residential building on the eastern edge of the property. He had spent 5 years courting the restaurateur, Reika Alexander from New York City's En Japanese Brasserie. The restaurant was elegant, expensive, exclusive. It closed without announcement a few years later. Bar Marmont closed in 2017. The restaurants came and went, but the hotel remained. Balazs often spoke about his philosophy of hospitality in interviews. He gave a quote that was repeated across the internet. "All good hotels tend to lead people to do things they wouldn't necessarily do at home." The quote echoed Harry Cohn's advice from the 1930s. The hotel's reputation for enabling boundary-crossing behavior was now part of its official marketing. The transgression was the product. Jay-Z and Beyoncé held their annual post-Oscar party at the Chateau, the most exclusive gathering in Hollywood. The hotel had become headquarters for celebrity excess, presented as artistic freedom and cultural sophistication. Helmut Newton remained Balazs' guiding light throughout the 1990s. And into the 2000s. "My mantra was to keep making the hotel better," Balazs later said, but not in any way Helmut would notice. If he didn't notice a change, We were on the right track. Newton continued living at the hotel through his 70s and into his 80s. He photographed constantly. The hotel was his subject and his home. He and June divided their year between Los Angeles winters and Monte Carlo summers, returning to the chateau year after year. On January 23, 2004, around noon, Helmut Newton left the Chateau Marmont in his Cadillac. He was 83 years old. He and June were preparing to leave Los Angeles for the season, returning to Monte Carlo. Newton was driving down Marmont Lane towards Sunset Boulevard. The hill descends steeply. As Newton approached Sunset, he suffered a heart attack. He lost control of the vehicle. The Cadillac accelerated down the hill. A photographer from the Associated Press was walking on the sidewalk. The out-of-control Cadillac nearly hit him. The photographer jumped aside. The car crashed into a retaining wall across the street from the hotel. The impact was severe. Passers-by rushed to help. Someone called for an ambulance. Newton was alive but unconscious. EMTs arrived within minutes. He was transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Doctors attempted to save him. His heart had been severely damaged by the heart attack and the trauma of the crash. Helmut Newton died at the hospital a short time after arrival. He was 83 years old. André Balazs was at the hotel when the accident happened. The crash occurred literally at the foot of the driveway. I happened to be there the morning he had his heart attack and crashed his car at the foot of the drive, Balazs later recalled. I ended up in the emergency room with him. Newton had been at the chateau for 30 winters. He had been Balazs's connection to the hotel's authentic history. His advice, "Don't fuck it up," had guided Balazs's renovation philosophy. With Newton's death, the last living connection to the hotel's golden era disappeared. What remained was Balazs's invention, a hotel that looked historic but functioned as a modern luxury brand marketed to celebrities and wealthy travelers. The soundproof rooms still kept secrets. Within 13 years, those secrets would become devastatingly public. In 2017, the New York Times published a story about André Balazs. The article reported that Balazs had groped actress Amanda Anka at a dinner party in London. The party was at Chiltern Firehouse, Balazs's London hotel property. He was hosting the dinner for Jennifer Aniston and Justin Theroux. Multiple witnesses saw Balazs put his hand up Amanda Anka's skirt and grab her crotch. The incident was brazen, public. Anka's husband, actor Jason Bateman, was present. The Times article described a pattern of sexual misconduct by Balazs dating back to at least the early 1990s. Multiple women told similar stories: unwanted touching, groping at parties and work events. Behavior that was predatory but had been tolerated or ignored because Balazs was powerful, wealthy, connected. Amanda Anka and Jason Bateman released a statement confirming the incident. They said his actions were dealt with at the time. The phrase was careful, legal, minimal. It acknowledged wrongdoing without elaborating. It suggested some consequence had occurred, though what consequence was never specified. The Times article made clear that Balazs's behavior had continued for years after whatever dealing with it had occurred. In March 2017, shortly after the New York Times allegations became public, Balazs resigned from Standard International. Standard was the hotel company he had founded in 1998. His first Standard hotel had opened in West Hollywood the same year. The brand had expanded to multiple cities. Balazs claimed his resignation was to focus on other properties, including the Chateau Marmont. The timing suggested otherwise. A statement from Standard International later revealed there had been multiple business and personal factors that contributed to the company's termination of André's employment, removal from the board, and repurchase of his interests. The 1990 #MeToo movement had begun holding powerful men accountable for sexual misconduct. Balazs was one of many exposed. But unlike some who lost everything immediately, Balazs retained ownership of the Chateau Marmont. He still controlled André Balazs' properties. He remained wealthy and powerful. The allegations did not immediately destroy him. 3 years later, the COVID-19 pandemic created a crisis that exposed deeper problems at the Chateau Marmont. In mid-March 2020, as lockdowns forced closure of non-essential businesses across the United States, the Chateau Marmont laid off its entire workforce. 248 employees were terminated. The layoffs were sudden, effective immediately. Workers received no severance packages despite some having worked at the hotel for decades. They received no extended health insurance despite being laid off during a pandemic. Instead of severance, Balazs set up a GoFundMe campaign for his former employees. He publicized the campaign as his response to the crisis. The GoFundMe raised $300,000. Balazs himself donated $100,000. To outsiders, this might have seemed generous. To the laid-off workers, it seemed like Balazs was crowdsourcing his own labor responsibilities. Context soon emerged that reframed the layoffs. Former employees revealed that they had been organizing a union drive for months before COVID hit. The organizing effort had been quiet but serious. Workers wanted protections. They wanted accountability for management behavior. They wanted dignity and fair treatment. The union drive had gained momentum in late 2019 and early 2020. Then the pandemic hit. Balazs laid off the entire workforce. Union organizing ceased. The workers alleged that Balazs had used the pandemic as an opportunity. He could eliminate the workforce before the union formed, before collective bargaining began, before workers gained legal protections. The layoffs, employees claimed, were union busting disguised as pandemic response. On July 28, 2020, Balazs announced a new plan for the Chateau Marmont. He would convert the hotel into a members-only private club and timeshare. The hotel rooms would become equity memberships. Only members could stay. At least one restaurant would remain open to the public, but the accommodations themselves would be exclusive. The announcement was framed as a pandemic pivot, a way to create a safer, more controlled environment for wealthy travelers nervous about COVID exposure. Former employees saw the announcement differently. Converting to a members-only club allowed Balazs to avoid rehiring the workforce he had just laid off. He could start fresh with new staff who had no history of union organizing. The pandemic crisis had become an opportunity to restructure the entire operation away from accountability. On September 16, 2020, The Hollywood Reporter published a comprehensive investigation into the Chateau Marmont. More than 30 former hotel employees spoke on record. They described a toxic work environment that had developed over years: racial discrimination, sexual harassment, management neglect. A culture where complaints went unaddressed and workers who spoke up faced retaliation. The investigation was detailed, extensively sourced, damning. 5 employees, 1 man and 4 women, stated explicitly that André Balazs had inappropriately touched them. The incidents occurred either at work or during company events. The touching was typically on their buttocks. It typically occurred when Balazs was intoxicated. One Chateau staffer told the reporter something revealing about the nature of the violations. "What's weird is that it didn't feel personal," she said. The observation captured how routine the behavior was. Balazs touched employees casually, thoughtlessly, the way someone might pat a dog. The violation was so normalized it seemed impersonal. Sonia Molina Sanchez had worked as a housekeeper at the chateau for over a decade. She described an incident where she was cleaning a guest room while a male guest was still present. The guest exposed himself. He began masturbating while Sanchez cleaned. She was trapped in the room, terrified, humiliated. She finished cleaning as quickly as possible and left. She immediately reported the incident to management. She believed they would ban the guest from the hotel. That was the policy, supposedly. Instead, management did nothing. The guest was allowed to return. Sanchez saw him again on subsequent visits. "Every time I saw him," Sanchez told the reporter, "I was reliving my experience. I felt abused again." Management had made her feel unsafe at work by refusing to protect her from a guest who had sexually harassed her while she performed her job. Adrian Jules, a black employee, reported that an inebriated white female coworker had sent him sexually explicit text messages. The messages were graphic, unwanted, inappropriate. Jules reported the incident to management. The response was inadequate. The coworker faced minimal consequences. Jules felt unsupported, unprotected. Multiple employees described similar patterns: complaints filed, promises made, no meaningful action taken. Several employees told the reporter that the problems had escalated after 2013. That year, Carol O'Brien, the longtime director of human resources, had quit. O'Brien had been at the hotel for years. She knew the culture, knew how to navigate management, knew how to advocate for employees within the system. After her departure, HR functions were outsourced to junior staff who lacked authority and resources to address serious problems. Issues that O'Brien would have investigated and resolved were now ignored or minimized. Without experienced HR leadership, the culture deteriorated. André Balazs released a statement to The Hollywood Reporter. This collection of allegations of supposed personal misconduct on my part is simply false. It's not who I am. His legal team added details. The hotel maintained a code of conduct that all employees must read and sign as a precondition of employment. A whistleblower hotline existed for employees to report concerns directly to outside integrity counsel. The hotel's counsel noted that if a staff member feels that a guest's conduct is inappropriate, they are encouraged to report that to hotel management. The statement emphasized that André Balazs Properties maintains a list of more than 260 guests that are not welcome at the Chateau Marmont because of unacceptable past conduct. The number was revealing. More than 260 banned guests. The hotel knew exactly how much bad behavior occurred within its soundproof walls. The discretion that was marketed to celebrity guests also protected them from consequences until their behavior became so egregious that even the chateau could not ignore it. The list of banned guests confirmed what employees had been saying. Management knew about the problems, tolerated them until they became impossible to tolerate, then quietly banned guests rather than addressing the systemic culture that enabled the behavior. The celebrity response to the Hollywood Reporter investigation was swift. Jane Fonda signed an early boycott pledge organized by Los Angeles Hospitality Union Unite Here Local 11. Other celebrities followed. Alfonso Cuarón, the Oscar-winning director, Lena Headey from Game of Thrones, Edie Falco, Constance Zimmer, Allison Pill, Tom Morello, guitarist for Rage Against the Machine, tweeted a message of solidarity with hotel employees urging a boycott. Chateau Marmont fired hundreds of its workers last year, Morello wrote, leaving those who had given decades of their lives without job security or health care during this pandemic. Organizations issued statements. SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Union, the National Organization for Women, both condemned the hotel's treatment of employees. In January 2021, Pastor Stephen John Marie of Clergy for Black Lives gave an interview about the Chateau Marmont situation. He used a specific phrase to describe Balazs' management practices: plantation capitalism. The phrase was inflammatory. It was also historically informed. Pastor John Marie was drawing a direct line from historical exploitation of enslaved labor to contemporary exploitation of service workers. The workers at the Chateau Marmont were not enslaved, but the power dynamics: wealthy white owner, largely immigrant and minority workforce, workers with no protections fired en masse during crisis, owner expecting gratitude for crowd-funded charity. The parallel was deliberate. The phrase gained traction. It connected contemporary labor practices to America's original sin of slavery. It framed the Chateau Marmont situation within a larger context of racial and economic injustice. In April 2021, André Balazs faced another crisis at another property. His business partners at the Mercer Hotel in Manhattan filed a lawsuit attempting to remove him from management. The lawsuit alleged financial mismanagement. It claimed Balazs had engaged in self-dealing by charging the Mercer's parent company $100,000 in personal legal expenses. The legal expenses were related to settlement of harassment allegations against Balazs. He had made the Mercer company pay for his personal settlements. The lawsuit stated that Balazs refuses to explain the charges or discuss similar issues at other properties. The Mercer lawsuit revealed that the problems at the Chateau Marmont were not isolated. Balazs' pattern of alleged misconduct and financial irregularity extended across his hotel empire. Under mounting pressure from lawsuits, boycotts, negative publicity, and union pressure, Balazs abandoned the members-only conversion plan in 2022. Union negotiations eventually produced a deal. The Chateau Marmont would continue operating as a traditional hotel with a unionized workforce. The workers who had been laid off in March 2020 gained some of the protections they had been seeking for years. The union contract provided job security, grievance procedures, workplace protections. The hotel that had operated for 90 years on discretion and management control was now subject to union oversight and worker protections. The hotel that Erwin Brettauer had integrated in 1942 faced credible accusations of racial discrimination 78 years later. The discretion that had protected Duke Ellington and Anthony Perkins had also protected abusers and enabled harassment. The soundproof rooms that enabled love affairs and artistic creation had also isolated victims and concealed misconduct. The architecture designed for privacy had become architecture of exploitation. The contradictions were not accidental. They were built into the foundation. Today, the Chateau Marmont stands at 8221 Sunset Boulevard, a 7-story Gothic castle that has survived earthquakes, economic crashes, neglect, notoriety, scandal, and pandemic. The reinforced concrete that Fred Horowitz specified in 1927 remains structurally sound. The double-poured soundproof walls function exactly as designed. The earthquake-proof construction has been validated repeatedly. The building survived major earthquakes in 1933, 1952, 1971, 1987, and 1994 without sustaining major structural damage. The Gothic towers still rise above the Sunset Strip. The turrets still cast shadows across Marmont Lane. André Balazs still owns the property through André Balazs Properties. The hotel operates with a unionized workforce following the agreement reached after the disputes of 2020 through 2022. The hotel maintains 63 accommodations, rooms in the main building, suites, cottages scattered across the grounds. 4 bungalows, including Bungalow 3, where John Belushi died. Visitors can book stays. Rates are expensive, reflecting the hotel's status as a luxury property and cultural landmark. No public tours are offered. The privacy policies that define the hotel for nearly a century remain in place. A no-photo policy is enforced in many areas. Guests are expected to respect other guests' privacy. The discretion is still for sale, though it now operates within the constraints of union contracts and employment law. In 1976, the hotel was designated a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument. The designation recognizes architectural significance, the Gothic Revival building modeled after French chateau, the earthquake-proof reinforced concrete construction, pioneering for its era, and cultural significance, the role in Hollywood history. What the designation does not mention: the construction workers who left no names in any record, the housekeepers whose labor went unrecorded for decades, the employees whose complaints went unaddressed until media exposure forced accountability, the guests whose behavior was protected by soundproof walls until their actions became impossible to ignore. The hotel's reputation remains complicated. Among progressive Hollywood circles, the Chateau Marmont is tarnished by the 2017 through 2022 revelations. The celebrity boycott continues from some quarters, but the hotel still attracts clientele. Celebrity sightings still occur, though less frequently than during the Balazs heyday of the 1990s and 2000s. The mystique of discretion still draws people who value privacy over publicity. The architecture that Harry Cohn designated in the 1930s as the place to get into trouble maintains that identity nearly 90 years later. The soundproof walls still promise privacy. The question of what that privacy enables remains unanswered. Visitors today walk through spaces where a century of Hollywood history accumulated, the corridors where Duke Ellington walked while composing swinging suites, the pool where Anthony Perkins and Tab Hunter met and began their 2-year affair, Room 36 where Montgomery Clift spent weeks recovering from his car accident, appearing nude on his balcony and screaming obscenities at passing cars, the bungalow where Nicholas Ray held the Rebel Without a Cause script, reading where James Dean and Natalie Wood first met, Bungalow 3 where John Belushi died on March 5, 1982, the driveway where Helmut Newton suffered his fatal heart attack on January 23, 2004, the rooms where 30-plus employees reported being harassed, discriminated against, groped, and ignored when they sought help. All of these histories coexist in the same reinforced concrete structure. The building does not choose which memories to preserve. The contradictions that define the Chateau Marmont from February 1, 1929 remain unresolved today. Fred Horowitz prosecuted civil rights cases in the South and fled towns after receiving death threats, then returned to Los Angeles and built a luxury playground for wealthy white tenants. Albert E. Smith converted a failed apartment building into a hotel that sold discretion to celebrities conducting affairs. Erwin Brettauer integrated the hotel and created sanctuary for black jazz musicians and closeted gay actors. Then subsequent owners faced credible allegations of racial discrimination and sexual harassment. Raymond Sarlo planned to demolish the building, moved in during his divorce, fell in love with it, and preserved it. André Balazs restored the hotel to a luster it never historically had, made it cool again, and presided over a culture of alleged harassment and discrimination. The hotel protected Duke Ellington and John Belushi, Anthony Perkins, and anonymous abusers, artistic creation and fatal overdoses, love and exploitation. The soundproof walls were earthquake-proof but could not contain scandal. The absent lobby created privacy and prevented oversight. The labyrinthine corridors enabled both escape and concealment. The architecture that made the Chateau Marmont special, the reinforced concrete, the Gothic towers, the double-poured walls, also made it dangerous. The discretion that protected artists also protected predators. The tolerance that welcomed everyone eventually coexisted with discrimination. The building Fred Horowitz designed to withstand earthquakes could not withstand the weight of its own contradictions. But the building still stands. The contradictions remain unresolved because they are unresolvable. They are the foundation. The Chateau Marmont remains at 8221 Sunset Boulevard. The Gothic castle that has never quite belonged in Los Angeles continues not belonging. The reinforced concrete stands solid on the hillside. The soundproof walls function as designed. Visitors can still book the rooms where Montgomery Clift recovered and Jim Morrison fell and John Belushi died and Helmut Newton lived for 30 winters, where Duke Ellington composed and Miles Davis hunted pheasant with Rip Torn and Anthony Perkins met Tab Hunter, where employees were groped and guests exposed themselves and management looked away. The hotel sells the same product it has always sold: discretion. The question of what that discretion protects, what secrets those soundproof walls contain, whose labor built this monument, and whose labor maintains it, what American luxury enables, and what architectural privacy conceals, those questions remain. The discretion is still for sale. The soundproof walls still stand. The contradictions remain unresolved. If you must get into trouble, the hotel still waits on Sunset Boulevard.